Barely a week goes by these days where you don't hear about some sort of sequel, remake, reboot, reimagining, re-imaging, or whatever the cool phrase of the week is nowadays anyway. But one thing that is far less commonplace than any of those other movies is the notion of a prequel. It's actually rare that a franchise or even a standalone movie will take the plunge to travel back in time and check out what's happening before established present-day canon. And even rarer is any such prequel actually being any good. But that's what we're looking at today, the best of the best. As I'm Jules, this is Whatculture.com, and these are the 10 best movie prequels ever. Number 10, Bumblebee. For those with warm and fuzzy memories of the Transformers cartoon of the 80s and the subsequent comics, toys, video games, etc. that followed, it was ridiculously cool to hear that Michael Bay was making a big-budget Transformer movie back in 2007. Only for those same fans, that 2007 offering was pretty horrible. As audiences struggled to identify each Transformer amongst the myriad of overly slick CGI beings who looked nothing like our childhood favourites, Bay decided to focus the majority of his time on blowing stuff up and zooming in on Megan Fox's backside. 4 further films followed, and none of them ever managed to capture the charm of this property. That was until Bumblebee finally arrived. An 80s set prequel, Bumblebee encapsulated the spirit, the energy, and the excitement of the Transformers property and perfectly brought it to life on the silver screen. Going for a more minimalist approach with Transformers that looked like shock horror, actually the Transformers that we remember, and using a brilliant blend of 80s music, made this an absolute triumph. Finally, Transformers fans were given the Transformers movie that they'd for so long craved. Number 9, X-Men First Class. By the time that Matthew Vaughn's X-Men First Class rolled around, the majority of moviegoers were actually pretty fed up with the X-Men franchise. The first X-Men movie was an absolute triumph. X2 was phenomenal, but then the ham-fisted duo of X-Men The Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine had definitely soured fans on the series. So when it was announced that a prequel movie set against the backdrop of the Cuban Missile Crisis was in development, interest was, well, minimal at best. Whether low expectations played into it or not, X-Men First Class surprised the masses by being just a brilliant, stylish slice of superhero spy cinema. Largely focused on the early days of Professor X and Magneto's relationship, we saw James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender put in a pair of stupendous performances as this duo. Bar 2017's breathtaking Logan, there had not been an X-Men movie since First Class that has gotten anywhere close enough to being as well developed as this 2011 masterpiece. Number 8, Prometheus. Now, there are clearly issues with Ridley Scott's 2012 return to the Alien franchise, yet this is a movie that is also brimming with so many positives. Now, visually, Prometheus was utterly mind-blowing upon its release. The stylish aesthetic utilized by Scott was, well, extraordinary, and so vastly different from what we'd come to expect from the Alien series. Likewise, Michael Fassbender again anchors this movie with a performance that is right up there as one of his best. But what bogs Prometheus down, of course, is that the marketing and early buzz around the movie had fans expecting to see something that felt very much like the Aliens films that they knew and loved, and this was not the case. Because instead, audiences got a slower-paced, more sci-fi skewed offering that went about establishing its own particular story. And that story just so happened to tie in with what we'd eventually see in 1979's Alien, but this was merely the first baby steps towards that endgame. It may get derided by some, and rightly so in many places, but Prometheus is a fine prequel that is crying out for a rewatch from some of its detractors. Number 7, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. While plans were long announced for a new trilogy of Star Wars films that would kick off with The Force Awakens, did anybody want another prequel movie? Well, I'll answer that for you. Hell no. Upon hearing that a standalone, one-off movie called Rogue One, A Star Wars Story was happening, even the most ardent of Star Wars fans struggled to muster up much enthusiasm for such a picture. But while The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and Solo, A Star Wars Story have all split opinion amongst audiences, the clear and above best Star Wars movie of the past few years has actually been Rogue One. Featuring Felicity Jones's Jyn Erso as the central figure of this film, Rogue One was a breath of fresh air in a Star Wars landscape that was becoming more and more cluttered. Taking place immediately before the events of 1977's Star Wars, or A New Hope for the cool kids out there, Rogue One gave longtime fans the chance to see just how the rebels managed to get the Death Star plans that are so pivotal to George Lucas's 1977 effort. But what's so special about Rogue One is that you know how it's going to end. You know that all of these characters have to die, yet you end up losing sight of that and instead just becoming invested in the story and are actually wondering how things will unravel. Of the recent Star Wars film releases, Rogue One is undoubtedly the best of the bunch. Number 6. Monsters University. It takes a special sort of cold-hearted soul to not even get a slight smile on their face from 2001's Monsters Inc., and the exact same thing can be said of the film's 2013 prequel. Monsters University may have taken 12 years to arrive, but it certainly was worth the wait. But rather than giving fans a straight-up sequel, Disney Pixar decided to go back in time and deliver a prequel in which Mike and Sully's college days are the main attraction. These future BFFs go the old cliched route of starting off hating each other, but wouldn't you know it, they ultimately end up realizing that they've got a lot more in common than they both first thought, and it makes for such a fun, entertaining, and sincere story. For Mike, he's from a struggling family and he is busting his ass off to make it as a scarer. On the other side of this particular coin, we have the lazy, privileged Sully who relies on his natural genetics-given ability to scare the pants off people. Where great prequels are concerned, you can't ignore Monsters University when discussing this topic. Number 5. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now, for whatever reason, it actually tends to get lost on a lot of people that Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is actually a prequel. I mean, sure, it was most certainly released after Raiders of the Lost Ark, but the cold hard facts are that Temple of Doom actually took place a year before Raiders. There's no way to argue that Raiders of the Lost Ark is not the greatest indie picture, for it well and truly is head and shoulders above the rest of the franchise. But Temple of Doom, you know what, it isn't a million miles away. What makes Temple of Doom so great is the fact that it's legitimately a dark movie at times. Like, does it get any more dark and messed up than having a twisted cult at the center of things, and with that eerie cult being more than happy to indulge in child slavery? Oh, and then there's the obvious kicker that said cult is obsessed with black magic? Yeah, all of that is pretty dark, and you know what, fun fact, this movie was actually the one that was responsible for ushering in the PG-13 rating for films. Make no mistake about it, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is a dark, dark movie, but it's also one of the finest prequels there is. Number 4. Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. Trust David Lynch to deliver a prequel that many didn't particularly want to see, yet ended up being one of the all-time must-see movies. By visiting the tormented final days of Laura Palmer's life, Lynch gave audiences a story that they were unsure that they actually really wanted, and that was even more so by the time the movie concluded. You see, Fire Walk With Me is an uncomfortable watch at times, and the bleakness and harsh reality of the sequel makes the audience question themselves a lot, but at the same time, it's a visually beautiful masterpiece that is borderline genius in its narrative and how it prods and pokes its audiences for a reaction. This is a movie that is a great example of David Lynch's work because it's bold, it's solemn, it's thought-provoking, it's truthful, it's far removed from any sugarcoating. The fact that Fire Walk With Me is still being debated to this day by long-time Twin Peaks fans should be enough to make you realize that there is something special going on in this 1992 movie. Both as a film and as a prequel, Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me is an undeniable piece of brilliance. Number 3. Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. Now, I know that usually we only do one entry per franchise, but come on, I kind of want to talk about this one because it's actually a bit of a guilty pleasure of mine, this film. Because while some people may poke fun at The Phantom Menace, others may label Attack of the Clones as the worst movie in the entire Star Wars saga, I think that it's completely unfair to throw Revenge of the Sith into the same pile as these two predecessors. Now, yes, Revenge of the Sith is actually a sequel, but it is also a prequel to the greatest trilogy in the history of cinema. And outside of the no moment, Revenge of the Sith can actually be a bit of a damn fine movie. It's overflowing with conflict, angst, and the realization of long-planned political power plays. It's the culmination of so many story strands, but it's also simultaneously the jump-off point for so many other ones that we know are to come. The color palette of this film is stunning, the performances are, well, for the most part, are fantastic, and the story itself is a roller coaster of a ride that you know can only end in tragedy. When looking at the components that make up a great Star Wars movie, Revenge of the Sith, well, it ticks all of the right boxes. Number 2. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. If you're looking for the definition of cool, then chances are a Clint Eastwood performance in the 1960s and 70s would give you a blinding example of such coolness. The third of Sergio Leone's masterful Dollars trilogy, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, is effectively a prequel feature. Eastwood's Man with No Name is the star of the show, and the action takes place as Goldie finds himself on the hunt to track down a whole slew of Confederate gold. Now, some may label this as the greatest spaghetti western that's ever been, and it's hard to argue with that. Regardless of what you think about about The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, it's at least in the conversation for the greatest film of this type. Clint Eastwood has never been better, and it's fantastic to see him slowly start to morph into the famed man with no name as he picks up parts of his signature costume as the film progresses. Plus, Lee Van Cleef as a roguish rascal is always going to guarantee to impress. To date, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly has rarely been topped when it comes to westerns, and let alone when it came to prequels. And number 1, The Godfather Part II. Now, it's technically a sequel, but The Godfather II is actually all prequel. The Godfather Part II is viewed as one of the greatest movies ever made, and is largely viewed as the greatest of the entire Godfather trilogy, which itself is pretty huge praise. But what makes The Godfather Part II so special is the way that so much of the film is spent in the past, fleshing out the character of Vito. And as the young Vito, Robert De Niro puts in one of the greatest performances of his career as he apes the antics and mannerisms of Marlon Brando. For De Niro imitating Brando, that alone should have The Godfather Part II high up on this list of great prequels. And when you throw in the stunning present-day scenes of Al Pacino's Don Michael Corleone relishing in power, it's easy to see why this film is rightly viewed as one of the best in the history of cinema. In spending so much time looking at Vito's rise to power and then mirroring it with Michael's rise to dominance, The Godfather Part II is most definitely a prequel, and most definitely the greatest prequel imaginable.